Welcome to FHI 360's Second Chance Summit, where we celebrate second chances. I am Lisa Johnson. I'm the director of FHI 360's National Institute for Work and Learning, and I will be your MC for the day. As we get started, I wanted to let you know that we are recording this meeting. It will be available. And later in the summit, we will have time for question and answer from all of you, the participants, and we do want to hear from you. So in the bottom of your Zoom, in the question and answer box, the Q&A, please put in the questions that you have, and we will be able to discuss your questions later in the day. Now it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce FHI 360's Chief Executive Officer, Patrick Fine.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to everybody who has joined this meeting today. Thank you for caring about people having a second chance. I also want to thank our panelists, who I expect are going to challenge us and inspire us with their remarks and their reflections during this Second Chance Summit. I'm particularly happy to be able to welcome everybody to this summit because second chances are so important. And I wonder how many of us who are gathered together today are here because we got a second chance. I know in my case, it wasn't just a second chance, it was a third and a fourth chance. As a teenager, I was a ward of the court. I saw the inside of more than one county jail. And it was because there was one adult who saw something in me and cared about me and had faith in me and gave me that second chance that I'm here today. So let's gather together today, recognize the importance of giving people second chances. And with that, I want to just welcome you. Thank you again, and turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you, Patrick, for sharing. And in the next hour, we will hear from Marcus Bulleck, Andrea Slider, Caitlin Dawkins, Barbara Richards, Stephen Bishop, and Mercedes Garcia. Each of them will discuss a theme featured in our brand new release publication, A New Justice Paradigm, Approaches for an Equitable System. And there are 5 themes in the publication that we'll be highlighting today: increasing equity in the justice system, trauma-informed training and approaches, community-based collaborations, strong personal relationships that Patrick just spoke of, and sustainable work and learning opportunities. We believe that combining these elements can result in a new justice paradigm. Before our speakers begin, I'd like to do a little scene setting for you. And what has become abundantly clear over this last year is that our justice system is biased. At times it's brutal and a place of punishment that disproportionately affects Black and Brown people. Alarmingly, Black males ages 18 and 19 were 12 times as likely after arrest to be imprisoned, different than the white males that were arrested. This reality results in more single-parent families, more families who are food or housing insecure, more disconnection from work and learning, and then more children are affected by trauma of having an incarcerated parent or sibling. By the age of 16, 2/3 of children in the United States have experienced a traumatic event of some sort. And adolescents who have had multiple adverse events like this are at a higher risk of poverty, homelessness, and incarceration. And when incarcerated, young adults with trauma often go untreated. Facilities can and should give time to young adults and need to give to them what they need to be fully equipped with skills and education to return back and re-enter their communities. So you can see on re-entry, our young adults have many mountains to climb and many obstacles to overcome. They say it takes a village, and we know that when done right, all benefit. We have found that strong personal relationships with caring adults matter, and they can anchor a returning community member to their community, and it can make all the difference in their success. These challenges are not news to our featured speaker, Marcus Bulleck. He is the founder and CEO of Flickshop. He is a justice reform advocate and quite an in-demand TED speaker, so we're thrilled to have him. After Marcus speaks, our panelists will discuss ways to improve the system and offer a more positive justice paradigm. So please keep your questions coming in the chat, in the Q&A. Thanks for joining us, and take us away, Marcus.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that awesome introduction. And thank you as well, Patrick. I'm super excited to be able to be here. Good afternoon to all of you amazing, oh, wait a minute, it's still morning now. At least on the East Coast this morning. So good morning to all of you amazing participants that are sharing your time with us this morning. I also want to take a moment to, I always like to take a moment to shout out all of the leaders whom I'm grateful to stand on the shoulders of as I work to contribute to the success path of other returning citizens that are like me. I'm super proud to be here and to share space with you this morning, especially as we build a conversation around second chances and what they can look like after incarceration. Because I enjoy these types of conversations so much, I'm going to apologize early for my extreme excitement to be here. Our mission at Flickshop is always rooted in love and empathy, and I never thought that my life would be centered around tech and advocacy this way. So I'm super pumped and overwhelmed at this opportunity. I've learned over the years of being an entrepreneur that prayed for second chances that most folks actually believe in forgiveness and community, but sometimes need a poster child to begin imagining what a second chance can look like. When we leave today, it is my hope that our community will band together to move the needle even further toward justice in this era of policy and reentry reform. And I want to hear from you guys, so make sure that you join us all in this conversation. That means jump in the chat, tweet, post on your IG stories, and ask questions that we can actually answer here today and create a conversation. And instead of spitting out a bunch of data or even possible solutions, because a lot of our panelists will talk about this a little bit later, I want to use my time with you to help shift the narrative and bring so many people to even closer proximity to a single story that has begun to move policy and create opportunities for so many others. You see, a few weeks after my 15th birthday, my best friend and I, who was 16 at the time, we made a horrible decision to approach a man sleeping in his car in a shopping mall parking lot, tap on the window to his car, demand that he get out of his car. We jumped in the passenger and driver's seat of that car and sped off into the night. That decision that we made as a 15 and 16-year-old kid was actually labeled as a carjacking, and the very next morning, we were arrested and detained, with a few months later, me getting sentenced with my mom and my sister and my grandmother and aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews all sitting behind me as they listened to their 15-year-old cousin and nephew and child and grandson get sentenced to 8 years in adult maximum security prisons. This means that I grew up spending all of my adolescent years and my early teenage and my teenage years and early 20s growing up inside of a prison cell. And while I can tell you that this was one of the darkest moments of my life as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21, 22, and 23-year-old growing up inside of these cells, I actually lived in denial for the first 2 years of my sentence. You see, my 15-year-old brain couldn't even understand what was happening to me and the ramifications of the decision that I made. And it wasn't until 2 years into that prison sentence where my best friend, who was in his mid-50s, because prison is one of the only places where you can be like 16, 17 years old and have a best friend in their mid-50s. But I asked him how long he'd been there, and he had told me he had served 31 years. When Danny B told me he had served 31 years, my heart sank, got smacked like a ton of bricks, palms got sweaty, and I realized in that moment that I was actually going to have to serve all 8 of my years in prison. You see, I was a high school sophomore, and all I wanted to do was spend Christmas and New Year's Eve and Easter morning with my family and my friends, just like all of the rest of the teenagers that lived in my neighborhood. But instead, these new world of living behind a box and listening to slamming steel doors with a cell partner that had life plus 43, that was my new life. And then it was my mom who began to sense my depression and my hopelessness after year 2, when she realized that she had to come in and sweep in and try to figure out how to ensure that I knew that there was life after prison. My mom came to visit me in a prison visiting room after I tried to push her away and tell her that I didn't want her to be consumed by all of the pat downs and the expensive collect calls and night after night of tears and crying and wonder if her baby boy was going to be okay. I didn't want her to experience this, but she told me in that prison visiting room that I had lost my mind and that a mother's love was going to be the thing that was going to be able to help chip in and save my life. I didn't understand what my mom was doing at the time, but she made a promise while sitting in that prison visiting room and told me that she wanted to send me a picture or write me a letter every day from that day forward to help me see what the life on the outside was going to look like before I came home. You see, there's no internet in prison. There's no Facebook or Instagram or easy emailing or texting or any of those technologies. And my mom wanted to be able to ensure that I saw the fat juicy burger or the big slice of cheesy pizza or pictures of a mattress in a department store. And she would write me a letter and attach those photos and mail them to me with a promise that one day I would enjoy a fat juicy burger or sleep on a comfortable mattress after prison. I didn't really understand what my mom was doing at the time. And while in prison, mail is like hitting the lottery, my best friends began to even live vicariously through my mother's letters and photos. It was in 2004 when I was released from prison, when my mom not only was there to come and pick me up and wrap her arms around me while we embraced for the next 30 seconds in the middle of a double slamming door breezeway at Coffeewood Correctional Center, but it was also that moment that allowed us to be able to see that this life was waiting for me on the other side, and there was potential positivity that was going to be a part of the new story. I fought through this new reentry process, looking for a job that finally landed me inside of a paint store while I was making minimum wage money, and then gave me restored the humanity and allowed me to reclaim my new life after prison that my mom had dreamt for me for so many years. That new job that was included me mixing paint at a paint store allowed me to be able to eventually begin to broker and become the conduit between the Miss Johnsons of the world that will come into the paint store and want their kitchens painted with the painters that will come into the paint store and complain about this looming recession that was happening in the country. It was the mid 2005, 2006, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that all of the ambition that I had fostered when I sat in those cells gave me an opportunity to want to figure out what to do next. It was that opportunity that said, Marcus, take this new budding brokerage that you have between the conduit of these two different customers at this paint store and launch a painting business that will eventually grow 5 years later to become a large construction company here in the Washington, D.C. area. That construction company allowed me the opportunity to be able to travel the world, for my mom to be able to retire from the federal government, for my sister even to be able to move out some of the worst neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., because we now had the resources and social capital to move our lives forward. I thank my mom so much for that moment, but it wasn't until my best friends who I lived in those cells with continued to call me and write me and want to figure out ways to be able to connect back to me the same way that my mom did when I was in prison. You see, I knew that if I was able to share these moments and experiences with my best friends that were there, they would be able to also come home and be able to reclaim their humanity and live life with a balance of hope inside of their perspective shift that would create a new world of Marcuses that are coming home. I wanted to figure out how to do this, but we didn't quite know how to be able to share these moments because it was 2012 and I had no idea how to print a picture from my cell phone. And I definitely didn't have the time to write a letter like my mom did when I sat in those cells. We ventured out and tried to figure out how to solve this massive problem of keeping families connected. And we ended up landing on what now is called Flickshop. Flickshop is the mobile application that allows our users the ability to take a picture, add some quick text, press send, and for 99 cents, we print that picture and text on a real tangible postcard, and we ship it to any person in any cell, anywhere in the country. Since I've launched, we've connected over 170,000 families and shipped almost 700,000 postcards throughout the country. And I'm proud of what our families represent. I'm proud of each one of them that are acting in the same way, the same manner of love that my mother had for me while I sat in prison. Since our launch of Flick Shop, I've been blessed to hire my amazing mom as our relationship manager. So, yep, she's still the boss of me here at the company. But we've also built the Flick Shop School of Business, where we mentor other returning citizens that journey down the road of entrepreneurship. And we've even launched Flick Shop Angels that allows for our community the ability to purchase Flick Shop credits that we give to children with incarcerated parents so that they can send as many pics as they want to their incarcerated moms and dads completely free. Flick Shop Angels gave our community an opportunity to help reconnect their homes and hearts to the humanity of family and childhood. This is just one way in the digital age that we can participate in racial injustice healing, and I hope that some of you will become Flick Shop Angels today. But all of our communities are filled with opportunities to be of service this way. We're all capable of creating the change to build the next wave of tech companies or marketing agencies, or maybe even finding a way to sit in your alma mater's classroom with the goal of making the dean's list. And while I know that we live in a divisive country, I also believe that we can contribute to our mission of building a more equitable and inclusive community. So I challenge you. Thank you, Patrick, for raising our awareness that challenges should be on the horizon. I challenge you to change the family conversations in your own homes, because I believe that this is how you drive policy decisions and contribute to the narratives that point toward the brilliance of people like me that don't want to live in the shadows or be judged by the worst decision of their lives. You see, this is our time, and it begins right where we are right now, just as it did for me many years ago when my mom committed to love and empathy while I sat inside of a prison cell. I'm so grateful to have shared just a bit of this journey with you and hope to create empathy, show the power of love and resilience, and to change our beliefs and biases so that we can help create even more second chances for others that are like me. Thank you so much for committing yourselves to creating a dope community that my children would be proud of. Because I'll tell you, Marcus Jr., who's 10 years old now, and Aya, who is 5 years old, they look at their dad and they don't see second chances. They don't see the history of the man that committed a horrendous crime when he was 15 years old, stealing cars and driving through parking lots. They see their father. My sister sees her brother. My mother, she sees her son today. My grandmother, she sees her grandson. Uncle and aunt, they see their nephew. My best friends, they see a leader in their community. This is all only simply because of a second chance. And there are 600,000 people that are coming home every year and want exactly what I have been able to accomplish today. And it's up to us as a community to make that happen. Thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity to share with you this morning. I'm super excited to see what our community continues to do in the years ahead. Thank you again.
Thank you, Marcus. And I'm sure the Q&A box is loading itself up with questions for you right now. We appreciate your passion and love and empathy and entrepreneurial spirit that you have. Next, I would like to welcome our panelists. We have Andrea Slider. She is the Chief Operating Officer and Therapist of the Right Way Foundation in LA, and she is going to be discussing trauma-informed approaches. She will be followed by Barbara Richards, the President, CEO, and founder of Project 180, and she will address the importance of social emotional learning and healthy relationships. Followed by Stephen Bishop, the Senior Associate of Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and he'll be speaking about community-led solutions, followed by our own Caitlin Dawkins, Director of Justice Programs at FHI 360, and she's going to highlight the challenges and opportunities of work and learning. And last but certainly not least is Mercedes Garcia. She is the owner of the International Native Nations Network, and she's going to complete the panel with how to achieve equitable systems and programs. Andrea, please begin.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today. Just wanted to give you a little bit of overview about our organization. The Right Way Foundation, we are an employment center located in Los Angeles, and we use an integrated mental health and employment services approach to support healing, job readiness and retention, and well-being for young adults who've had overlapping involvement in both the foster care and justice systems. And through our work, we've really learned that youth who interact with these systems experience high rates of childhood trauma, re-traumatization, trauma-related conditions such as PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and limited social and family support. And this reality has really shaped our belief that second chances start with trauma-informed and trauma-responsive approaches, which include first acknowledging that childhood trauma is an underlying factor that can lead to justice involvement, have long-term or has long-term effects on mental health and well-being, and are compounded by the trauma of structural racism, involvement in the child welfare system, and incarceration. Second, focusing on building trust-based relationships in which young people are empowered to use their voice and make choices about their own lives, because we've learned that this is especially important when supporting system-impacted young people whose decisions have been made by others, typically social workers, probation officers, and the courts. Third, helping young adults become job ready by teaching them the skills necessary to land a job while focusing on the role of mental health and well-being in job retention and long-term career success. So at Right Way, this is accomplished through peer support group sessions that discuss the effects of trauma on the brain, body, and behavior, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, problem solving, self-advocacy, and self-care. And fourth, and really the reason why we're here today, is connecting young adults to trauma-informed employers who provide empathetic and non-judgmental support to youth as they navigate employment. So I will echo Lisa's sentiment that we recognize that for system-impacted youth affected by early traumatic experiences, having the support of at least one caring adult is critical to successful reentry. And that's why we train our employer partners to recognize the signs of trauma. We teach them strategies for building youth-centered mentoring relationships in the workplace, and we assist them with the implementation of their own trauma-responsive and healing-centered policies and practices. And I'll leave out on this note, just kind of to close out here. A trauma-informed workplace, at least for what we've learned, reduces the likelihood of re-traumatization, increases job satisfaction and stability, fosters a sense of belonging, and most importantly, promotes a successful reentry. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'd like to pass it along now to Barbara.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Lisa, Marcus, and Andrea. Project 180 is a reentry nonprofit for adults who are currently or have formerly been incarcerated. We have 6 programs, and I'll refer to our residential program to discuss how we promote social, emotional learning and healthy relationships. All of our residents are men who have been incarcerated and suffer from the disease of addiction. Most began using drugs and alcohol in their early teens, one as early as 6 years old. Most have experienced gutter addiction in numerous incarcerations. 20 to 25 incarcerations is not unusual. And many had unstable relationships with their family and community, but most of all, they did not have a healthy relationship with themselves. Our job is to help residents develop healthy identities by stabilizing in 5 areas. Recovery is the foundation of everything: housing, employment, finances, and relationships. To this end, we require every resident to attend 12-step meetings, find a sponsor, work the steps, and engage in relationships with other individuals in 12-step. We provide stable housing with long-term residency from 6 months minimum to maximum of 24 months. In the home, everything, all belongings are safe, they're organized and put away, and all of the men are participants in keeping the house neat and clean, and nutritious food is always available for meals. Our residents are required to work a full-time job that brings, of course, not only a paycheck, but also the opportunity to learn new skills, to find dignity and pride in their work, and to bring new friendships that are unrelated to using drugs or alcohol or incarceration. And we provide the opportunity for our residents to practice good money management skills because they're required to pay a weekly program fee and their monthly phone bills. And we ask them to save for their graduation from Project 180. This stabilizing process transforms one's self-image and boosts his self-confidence, and that changes his relationship with himself and thus with his family and the community. In terms of stabilizing and restoring relationships, we ask that our residents engage in self-observation and introspection and report and acknowledge any difficulties they've had, accomplishments and milestones at our weekly house meetings. And if they need help, that's a safe place to reach out. By staying in active recovery, we find that family relationships are restored. Family members see how hard the individual is working to turn his life around, and the resident is no longer ashamed to get together with his family members. In terms of his relationship with the community, we have our residents write sincere and heartfelt thank you notes to our donors who help keep the residential program going. And by introducing them to civic leaders at Project 180 functions, which could be a dinner at one of our houses for the state attorney or a judge, or it could be just communicating with them at outside functions as regular people rather than meeting them across a courtroom. At the end of the program, the men no longer identify exclusively with the worst things they ever did. They have new experiences that reflect normalcy, stability, progress, and achievement that help them react calmly and appropriately when new life challenges arise. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Barbara. And Stephen Bishop.
So good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this really important panel. As noted, I work for the Annie E. Casey Foundation and our Juvenile Justice Strategy Group. And one of our key mantras at the Casey Foundation is about creating a bright future for all children and families in the United States. And in our juvenile justice team, that really takes on a special meaning because we know that in this country, oftentimes it's so easy to discard young people who've been system involved, who've caused harm in their communities. And so really maintaining this mantra about creating a bright future for all young people, even when they have caused harm to communities, and again, not being defined by the worst decision that they've made is really important. Talking about community-led solutions is so critical when we talk about young people. The reality is that the other topics that the other panelists are talking about, whether it's trauma-informed approaches, healthy relationships, work and learning experiences, all of these need to be rooted in community for young people to be successful because the context the young people live in, their environment, their cultural roots, all of those things help create identity and are so critical to successful outcomes for young people. So we want to make sure that all of these types of solutions are firmly rooted in community for a few reasons. One, we know that almost all young people engage in some form of delinquency, criminal behavior, or risky behavior, and that almost all young people will age out of those behaviors with or without system intervention. We also know that we get much better outcomes when young people are system involved. We get much better outcomes in communities rather than institutions, even if it's the most well-intended group home facilities for young people, or certainly youth prisons or adult prisons. We get much better outcomes in community settings. And when those interventions are really focused and on being family-centered, on developing skills for young people, and also building their connections to positive adults and positive organizations within their community. The third thing is that young people need practice. We can try to give young people skills in artificial settings like youth prisons and residential settings. But the reality is for young people to really grasp the ideas, to really be able to progress and grow, they need to practice in real life settings with lots of supports from caring adults around them. And so we need to really focus on community-based interventions. Patrick said at the top, where would any of us be without second chances? And the reality is, for young people, for youth development, second chances is just part of the growth process, and we really need to embrace that. So 2 key areas I'll just talk about as I'm wrapping up in terms of where we should really think about community-led solutions. One is thinking about diverting as many young people from the formal system as possible. As I said, almost all young people will age out of those behaviors with or without system intervention. And so we really need to take advantage and understand that system involvement will cause more harm and likely more trauma and pull them deeper into the system. But if we can divert them away from the system and use that opportunity to connect them to positive adults, community organizations in their community, the necessary supports that will prevent future system involvement, that's where we get the most bang for our buck. And then on the other side of that, when we do have young people who are formally involved, like for instance on probation, these probation systems should really lean heavily on those community partnerships. Probation should be a short-term prospect, so we really want to leverage and maximize community partnerships. Approaches like credible messengers, making sure that young people are developing leadership skills and being engaged in civic engagement in their local communities. Those are the ways we really promote community safety long-term and that are going to give us the best outcomes. And with that, I will pass it back. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephen. And next, I'm introducing Caitlin Dawkins.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa, and thank each of you for joining us this morning. I am Caitlin Dawkins, the Director of Justice Programs here at FHI 360's National Institute for Work and Learning. The stigma of having a record and barriers to employment and education that comes with that builds, these seemingly insurmountable barriers for people looking to make the most of their second chance. We have heard through conversations with people across the nation about how frustrating it is not to be able to receive quality programs and work in education while in prison, but also how humiliating it can be to complete hundreds of jobs applications without receiving any calls back. FHI 360's publication, A New Justice Paradigm, which launches today, highlights data on how barriers to education employment affect people impacted by the justice system. It is staggering that the research suggests that employers are 50% less likely to make a callback or job offer to applicants with a record. Young adults reentering our communities find themselves transitioning from one system, the justice system, to another system, the employment system, and face a completely new and different set of expectations immediately. Employers in the labor market really drive which skills and certifications are employable, and employers may also expect a second chance applicant to provide a multitude of documentation to be hired, all which we know can be difficult for people to secure. People are also faced with reliving their past mistakes that they hope to leave behind during the hiring process. FHI 360's Compass Rose Collaborative creates opportunities for people reentering the community from incarceration and increases access and equity to education and work. We do this by collaborating and securing partnerships across the community to understand local employer and market needs. We research the high demand fields in communities across the US and design training programs alongside employers that are willing to hire our pipeline of trained, skilled, and prepared young people. We also partner with young people themselves who are in our programs. We amplify their voices and we learn from their experience and expertise. The US justice system is bursting at the seams with people who have not had access to quality education or jobs. FHI 360 also builds the capacity of prison programs and staff to provide the many talented people in prison access to high quality programs. Those benefits spill over into their communities after reentry, because they are then able to provide meaningful contributions to their talents and skills. We will also train people through our registered apprenticeship program to use their talents and lived experiences to provide support and youth development to the next generation of young people impacted by the justice system. We found that people in our programs do not only want to make amends for their own past mistakes, but they also want to support the next generation of young people in making healthy and safe choices. Approximately 6.7 million Americans live under the control of the American justice system, whether that is through incarceration or some type of supervision. FHI 360's 360-degree approach promotes positive outcomes through our programs for people across the justice continuum. That could be from a first contact with police all the way through re-entry into their communities. We really want to use our programs to keep young people out of the justice system. But we know, and Marcus actually mentioned this number earlier, we know that there are 600,000 Americans that are released into our communities every year, and we have the collective responsibility to ensure that they are ready to enter the workforce. Extending opportunities for people to enter work and learning is not only impactful for families and economic development in general, but it's also important to each of us. We all live in our communities together, and to keep our communities safe, we need to provide people with opportunities to reduce their likelihood that they will revert back to behaviors that may have gotten them involved with the justice system to begin with. You know, whether you can hire someone in need of a second chance, create opportunities, or support programs and policies that remove barriers for people, we all can have a role in supporting people who are reentering the communities in which we all live together. One young person participating in an FHI 360 program in Arkansas is quoted as telling us, "This program helps me to stay positive. This program can help other people to get their second chance like I did." On behalf of FHI 360, I would like to thank each of you in this network of second chance supporters for your commitment and action to ensuring that every person has a second chance. Thank you, and I will turn it back to Lisa.
Thank you, Caitlin. And next is Mercedes Garcia.
Dios Inchiniao, thank you, Lisa. Greetings, everyone. My name is Mercedes Garcia. I'm a citizen of the Basco Yaqui tribe, coming to you from ancestral Yaqui and O'odham homelands today in Tucson, Arizona. Thank you so much for having me. I am also the owner of the International Native Nations Network. We are a consulting firm that works to engage, empower, and mobilize our tribal communities. I have 4 very short minutes to talk to you about building equity in our system today. And I'll talk to you about 3 things. A, building equity in our systems for youth has to also include a discussion about building equity in our system for families. So I have a couple of examples from both systems. I'll also talk to you about community prosecution. And the third thing is Native justice systems as models and looking at our Indigenous communities as ways and how they build equity to build equity in our systems today. Starting off, why are we even having this discussion about equity? Realistically, that's because the Western justice system is just not holistic. It does not consider the whole of a person. It does not consider all of the circumstances and issues that cause them to arrive there. Things like slavery, things like the effects of slavery, the effects of boarding schools, the effects of violent racism matter when we're talking about helping the folks that we work with in our communities. And add to that a broken mental health system, as well as untrained core actors in dealing with mental health challenges and siloed services, and we have a recipe for racial inequity. I offer to you 3 Indigenous solutions, approaches as solutions. The first being community prosecution. Community prosecution is really premised on us as system actors asking ourselves, why is this person who keeps coming through the system as a frequent flyer coming through the system? I don't think they want to be drunk, picked up for public intox every day. I don't think that that's the life that they want. Do they have a mental health problem? Are they homeless? And how can we craft a plea or create sentences that helps them address those problems? Community prosecution is a way to start building equity now. And it asks us and it requires us to not think about our people as widgets, but as human beings. Restorative justice is the second approach. That's an Indigenous approach premised on when you do something wrong, you acknowledge, apologize for it, and the victim, when we're talking in Western terms, acknowledges, receives that, and accepts it, and you move forward in harmony. We don't have the idea of throwaway people or castaways or sending people away in Indigenous communities. We move forward in harmony. That's one way for folks coming back to our communities to have more equity. Culturally rooted alternatives to incarceration is something you can also do now. For us in the 61 communities I work with, that includes sentencing youth to chop wood for elders, sentencing them to go spend time with elders and having the elders sign off on that. Building relationships is really at the root of culturally rooted alternatives to incarceration. Building and rebuilding the relationships that policies and unjust and racist laws really have that have resulted in the high rates and disproportionate rates of our Black and Brown youth and families in these systems. The last thing I'll end in my last minute is a call to action. I started off by letting you know whose land is I'm on. They might be dropping a couple of links in the chat now. There's a phone number. If you text that number with your city and state, it'll tell you on whose ancestral homelands and whose Indigenous lands you're on. The second link is a link that tells you tribal leader contact information. Reach out to tribes. Together is the only way that we're going to be able to improve the outcomes for our communities. And the third thing I'll leave you with on this point is just to always honor, acknowledge, and respect the knowledge that is shared with you from Indigenous communities. There is much to learn from one another. And I work with one community right now that has used these methods that I just briefly touched on and have flipped the juvenile recidivism rate on its head. 20% recidivism rate in Montana at the Fort Belknap Indian community. I always shout them out. They've done incredible work integrating their culture, horse culture, integrating these family-based alternatives and incentives for their child welfare, families, and case plans. And I know that I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up. That is my alarm. Sorry about that. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Mercedes Garcia, bynatives4natives@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mercedes, for keeping this passion going. And I'd like to invite all of the panelists and Marcus to join me on camera. If we were all in the same room, we'd just sort of look at each other, but we'll do it all this way. And we'll move to just some discussion with all of you and then move into the questions in the chat. So some of you mentioned the need to keep young adults out of the justice system altogether. We talked about the justice system isn't holistic. And how can this work as a reformed justice system? Barbara, I'd like to start with you.
Okay. Well, I would suggest having more problem-solving courts. I know that that's still court, but in Sarasota, we have a fabulous teen court that is where the teens serve as jury and as both prosecution and defense attorneys. So that's one thing I would suggest. Also having the sheriff's officers and police officers be trained in crisis intervention training. That's something else that we've done here, and it has proven to be a really great initiative. It helps officers recognize mental illness and problems that really don't have any business being in the criminal justice system. And then I would also just like to suggest something that was suggested to me by Ralph Diaz, who is the Secretary of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation for the state of California. He said, stop hiring criminal justice and criminology graduates to be correctional officers and deputies. Start hiring social workers and psychologists, and you're going to see a sea change in how many people come back. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Lisa. And I love a lot of what Barbara just shared. And I would just like to say that, FHI 360 is really committed to using an equity lens to guide and strengthen our work and decision-making processes. So we do make greater contributions and impact to addressing racial and social inequities. Our vision is for every person to have the potential to reach their highest potential. And so we ensure that that is embedded in all of our work and programs. FHI uses our programs such as the Compass Rose Collaborative, our education and workforce program for young adults, as a diversionary tactic to keep young people out of jail and prison. For instance, we work with community partners to cultivate relationships with their local justice partners and courts so that judges can order young people directly into our program in lieu of serving prison or jail time. This in turn gives the young person a second chance and provides them with supportive services through our program. And we feel very confident that connecting young people to these programs can keep them from having unsafe behaviors. For instance, only 2% of our past program participants were convicted of a new crime within 1 year of their release into the community or placement on supervision. And that really serves as our evidence that equitable and proportionate court sanctions and access to programs such as the Compass Rose Collaborative can keep young people in their communities. This example of restorative justice is, a small piece of the model for what the infrastructure of a reformed justice system should look like. People can make amends for their mistakes, to include working to pay restitution or completing community services. Communities impacted by crime are restored and communities are safer, and that is really true justice.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. And your perspective, Stephen?
Yeah, I think quite simply, the best way to build greater and expansion of diversion and more opportunities for prevention is that public dollars need to be put out there to resource. What we've seen over the last year in the wake of so many calls for racial justice through the pandemic is just a broad array of community organizations that have stepped up to the plate and continue to support people in their communities. But they need to be better resourced to do that. So part of it is us shifting our mental model to understand, again, that families and communities should be the first line when young people touch the justice system. So building direct pipelines where as soon as there's police contact, referrals can be made to community organizations, not to police departments, because most offenses are low level, and then resource those community organizations to be able to triage, to make referrals to the appropriate other human service or providers, social service agencies to address family crisis, mental health needs, drug and alcohol, or just to provide the type of mentoring and social support that young people need. But we really need to resource those out appropriately. Too many community-based organizations are running on shoestring budgets, having to chase down grant dollars year after year, looking over their shoulders, as opposed to receiving the appropriate dollars so that from year to year, they know that they have resources in place to serve their communities. And these are the folks that people in their communities trust. So we really need to really lean on them more to be the first line in this effort.
I think that poses another question. We learned a lot during our interviews for the publication. The human connection was the secret sauce, and a lot of you spoke about that today, to make reentry successful. And yet it's the hardest to quantify, it's the hardest to replicate. How do we make sure that returning adults do get connected post-incarceration to people who can help them, nurture them, and give them the skills and the second chances that they deserve? Andrea?
Thanks, Lisa. I love this question. I think it has a multifaceted response as well. But I think first we got to start with asking young people what they need. And as service providers, this is something that, we do regularly, but I think doing a comprehensive assessment of what they need in order to be successful. So whether that's connecting them to, disability student services or mental health services or whatever the need might be. And I think also as service providers, we're responsible for building these trusting relationships through consistency and dependability first, before we send them out to, our community partners. And then it's also important that we connect young people to supportive individuals in the spaces that young people are in, right? So for example, in their communities and for example, community colleges, making sure that we're connecting them to a supportive person there, and maybe training similarly to what we do with employer partners, training community college partners and administration and professors, as well as vocational training programs on trauma-informed and healing-centered best practices, and kind of, going that route.
Great, thanks. And Marcus?
Thank you so much for that, Andrea. Like, at the risk of being redundant, Yeah, all the stuff that Andrea just said, I think, is massively important. One of the things I'm just thrilled about is that the audience is being very thoughtful about ensuring that we're connecting folks to resources well before they come home. I think that's a bigger part of the conversation. I just want to be able to just stick a pin in that, just to be able to make sure that everyone hears that, right? Like if we wait until people are coming home to begin the reentry process, then we probably waited just a tad bit too late. Let's be very thoughtful about the practices that we're doing and make sure that we're rolling them out before people come home. That's one. And then the second thing, again, being redundant, I think that it's important to be able to make sure that we include the people that we want to be able to support inside of these conversations. Thank you so much, Andrea, for saying, hey, look, hey, how about you ask the folks that we want to support, what is it that you need? I promise you, once you go into a room and click the light on for the people that are in these cells, that's all they need. They don't need you to come and push them and pull them and tell them, drop them where they need to be. I promise you, go in, click the light on and say, hey, how can I be of service? And I think that when you lead with service, it becomes your lottery ticket for the success of so many others after they re-enter.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. And Mercedes, your perspective, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Marcus, both of you and Andrea. I think that's absolutely right. I think for Black and Brown communities, a lot of what we can do is really go back to our roots. Our communities are not nuclear families. They're really community-based, and looking at and asking them, just like Marcus said, who oftentimes the answer is with the person themselves, but no one ever bothers to ask them. And really setting that up ahead of time. And what this costs us, the effect, the impact that we can have as system actors, what it really costs us, a lot of times people talk about, oh, we don't have the funding to do that. We need funding to set up that program or to hire that position. No, it takes time. That we can pick up the phone. I ask you, what can you do today that will take you a 20-minute phone call to make a connection, a relationship, outreach that can profoundly change the direction and course of a person's life when they come back. And for our communities, it's about being, I think Marcus hit on the head, less reactive and more proactive. And it's only gonna suit our communities better. And also, just as these folks are coming back home, those relationships are so important. Connect them to elders, using the same models that a lot of the communities I work with employ for youth. Connecting adults with models, with elders for mentorship as well will be a huge play. The folks need the mentorship not only for jobs and education, but also just for personal life skills and personal relationship building. So I think those are two things I can offer. Thanks.
Barbara, you have your hand up.
I do. I wanted to just mention something that we've started at Project 180. We're calling it First Week Out, where we do in-reach. We partner with the probation office in Farr County, and we find out all of the people who are coming back in the next 6 months and write to them, send them a survey, ask them exactly what they will need. We have everything from clothing to housing to, everything, job, all of it, cell phone even. And if someone's coming back without housing and they are willing to go into a program, we have several philanthropists in our locality who will fund them for the first couple of weeks. We make sure somebody meets them at the bus stop. We're really trying to go upriver and get relationships established prior to people's release. And I think it's a great model for other localities as well. We do that for everybody who's coming back to our county.
Great, thanks for addressing that chat question. A follow-up one to that is, anyone on the panel familiar with pen pal kinds of opportunities? That we had a few people writing in that they'd love to be able to write to young people, given what you said, Marcus, to keep connected and to keep them feeling the way your mom was helping you with.
I'll jump in there because, we deal directly with, sending correspondence back to people that are in sales. One of the things, just to kind of sort of like, the young people is hard, it's challenging. Flickshop is experimenting with the beta project that allows for the community to be able to send anonymous postcards to people that are in sales, just to let them know that you care, right? It's a string of the Flickshop Angels project. But even with that, it's challenging to be able to do it with young people, for at least for us internally, because we have a big strict thing around privacy, and we want to ensure that we're protecting our young people. Data is, the thing that we are learning that's controlling our company even. In machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of those things can contribute to one of the other collateral consequences that come along with going to prison. And when those data points become accessible to others out in the world, some people can use it maliciously, and we want to prevent that from happening at all costs. But I do think that, there are tons of websites that will allow you to be able to identify others that are sitting in cells and become a pen pal outside of Flick Shop. Some of them are writeaprisoner.com, pen pal, inmatepenpal.com. You can literally just Google inmate pen pal, and then you'll probably find, as much as I hate that word inmate, if you can literally Google the word inmate pen pal, and you'll be able to find any of these service providers. But I think that it's going to be really challenging if folks are really doing the right thing and helping protect our young people by keeping their information private.
Great, thanks, Marcus. And I think you also bring up another point about language. And a lot of people in the chat are asking about, are there policies, are there local state policies that we should get behind, or are there things that are working? And language matters and terminology matters to really let people be human. We're all human. So how can we do that? What is there any in our last minute or so advice there to the audience about that?
I'll jump in. I'll just say, yeah, I think we really want to push at the local level, but more so even at the state level, for policies that by statute require diversion, because we see time and time again that youth of color in particular get less opportunities at diversion and prevention and getting even these second chances. And so we really need to mandate some of that by statutes, so setting up policies that require that, attaching funding to it as well, and really making sure that justice policies are really focused around youth development, that is pouring resources toward what we know young people need, which is attachment to positive adults. They need opportunities for vocational or academic achievement. Too often we're caught up in these false notions of accountability and just having young people comply with conditions, as opposed to what the overwhelming research tells us about what all young people need to grow and thrive. So really making sure that those state policies align with that, not just in the practice, but also the dollars that are attached.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And in our last 55 seconds before we all get cut off, I truly want to thank all of you. Patrick for joining us, welcoming us, Marcus for sharing your lived experience and your passion, each of our panelists for sharing your wisdom, your stories, and for your support for the young people around this country who deserve second chances, and for providing them those second chances. You all make a difference, so thank you. And to the audience who tuned in today, we appreciate that you shared your precious time on this Zoom call for an hour on such an important topic. It is Second Chance Month. President Biden has declared April Second Chance Month, and we're participating at 1 o'clock today with one of our partners, the Prison Fellowship, in their Twitter chat. So let's keep this going. Let's keep this discussion, and people that really matter, let's keep them center stage, especially during Second Chance Month. Thank you all so much.